Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hi, everyone. I guess we'll get started. Good afternoon. Thank you for attending. This is Committee Chair Ashley Esposito, and I would like to welcome you all to the June 17th Policy Committee meeting. If you have not done so, please mute your phone, and anyone who does not mute their phone may be muted by the call moderator or removed from the call. And additionally, please turn off your video if you're not a board member, the CEO, or her staff. I will now read a roll call of the board to identify who's present, and please identify yourself first before speaking on the record. Chair Sally. Commissioner Ames Messenger.
Ames Messenger present.
Hi. Commissioner Chicas Guzman. Commissioner Redding Lallinger. And I'm present. So we have three folks absent, but I do see Commissioner Sally on the line, so we have some audio issues.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Rob.
Oh yeah, I can't hear you. I can see you, but I can't. Okay, I think he's going to rejoin. Okay, so we will go ahead and get started. And it looks like the first presentation that we're going to have is policy BEA, regular business meeting. Do we have someone to present?
Hello, ma'am. Would you mind repeating that, Commissioner Esposito? I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I heard you.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, but would you mind repeating what you said? I missed a
Yes.
small part of that.
Yeah, the first thing on our agenda is policy BEA, regular business meetings.
Apologies,
like
that would be the board office. Tanisha, is it possible for you to pull up the presentation? Sorry, I'm a bit in transit at the moment. Or Josh, any of the other folks are on. I apologize for that. I was like, that is me.
Hi, Jennifer. Yep, if you give me a minute, I had to join for audio by my phone, but I can pull it up.
Gotcha.
Yep,
Okay.
just give me 1 second. Won't take long.
Thank you. Oh, Josh has it. There we go. Okay, or Jonathan, thank you. Okay, so this is just an update for BEA. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is with priority 7 of the board priorities. Move on to next slide. Should go fairly quickly. So this is for our regular business meetings. We're just making an adjustment. It's very specific in the policy. for both the timing of the meeting as well as which 2 days in the month that we have it. And so we need just a little bit more flexibility for the board. So we would like to make the language or have the language reflect that we would have 2 board meetings, so just twice a month. And at this time, we were going to adjust the language. It originally said 5 o'clock for the business meeting, which we know that we've been doing at 5:30. And I know there might be some question about leaving that a little bit more flexible as well. So that's the only change. We are going to continue to have our 2 public meetings a month, but we just wanted to, again, be a little bit more flexible in the timing. Next slide. And so the revised language you can see here, the regular business meetings will be held twice a month rather than specified which days those were. And they would be in the first floor boardroom. And then we adjusted the time to 5:30. Next slide. And this is the suggested stakeholder engagement. So we will share this and see what kind of feedback that we will get. And then next slide. And then this is the timeline. Because this is such a small change to the policy, we would like to present here in policy and then have approval at the board meeting that's in person on July 22nd so that we can implement these changes in the upcoming calendar. And I think that's the last slide. Purchase questions. Thank you. So any questions? Or comments? Chair Sally?
Yeah, so I just want to, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I have team issues all the time. My comment here is that just because I think it's great that we're just clarifying the start time for the public. My concern with having just such a rigid 5:30 is that we're typically running late on the start time. And my question is, do we need to specify 5:30 or could we leave it a little bit more open-ended? Or maybe suggest a range of start time. It's good to notify the public when we are starting, like on all of our external communications, but I think in policy makes it a little bit more challenging to always adhere to that start time.
Yeah, we can definitely make that note and make that adjustment before we go to first reader.
Got it.
That's a good point. Thanks. Any other questions or comments? Sorry, Chair Esposito, this is probably for you to ask. I apologize. Calling out people. Anything else? Okay.
Yeah, nothing from me.
And nothing from you? Okay.
Hmm.
All right. I think that's it for us. There's nothing else.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And next we have policy IGE curriculum framing conversation.
Yep. Hi, good afternoon. Joan Dabrowski, Chief Academic Officer. So I will be here to frame our plans to reopen and take a look at policy IGE curriculum. So if we go to the next slide. The plan for the framing conversation is to give a quick overview of the timeline, a rationale for why we are bringing IGE forward for review, give some background and context, give a bit about the current state of our IGE policy, propose some next steps, and then certainly want to leave time for some framing questions and opportunities to hear from the board around how we're going to embark on this review. So if we go to the next slide, here's just sort of the frame. Today, we start with our framing conversation. This will come to policy committee in November, then to first reader in January, second reader in March. That is the timeline. Okay, so then why are we looking at IGE? So a number of things have come to us that really make this an important opportunity for us. So first, we haven't taken a look at this policy since 2019, and we really do want to make sure we are aligning with best practices given the scope of what this policy holds. There has also been some new state laws and policies. Particularly, we've had some new guidance from the state around math, around literacy, and around college career readiness. We want to make sure that that is reflected in our policy. We've also had some interest from members of the board and the Baltimore City arts advocate community about really wanting to look at fine arts more strategically in policy. And so we want to bring that. We think this might be a place where it could really show up and already does. And we want to talk through that. And then lastly, we're super excited that starting next year, we're going to have a new learning management system, which is called sort of in the sort of LMS is sort of the jargon. But what that is, and the program that we're going to be using is called Canvas. That is going to help support curriculum access for students, teachers, and families, which is a huge change for us. And it really is something that I think will help get ourselves to a 21st century experience with how folks can experience our curriculum materials and resources, and our opportunity to make sure that this is aligned in our policy as well. So that is the set of the sort of rationale for why we're coming together today. So if we go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about what informs. There's a lot of legal authority. There are some related board policies. Again, this is a pretty meaty policy, and there are also some regulations that are part of it. So this just lists those there as reference. But if we go to the next slide, we wanted to dig in a little bit more specifically around Maryland law that does call out the importance of local LEAs, establishing and making sure that there are curriculum guides and courses of studies for all of the schools within its jurisdiction, and making sure that there are appropriate programs for students with special needs. So again, Maryland law calls this out very explicitly, as well as we have some particular House bills around defining the importance of having standards, curriculum resources, and making sure that that is in tight alignment. In fact, they talk about articulating a penalty when you're not aligned with standards. So again, that's something that's really important that we want to make sure is lifted up in our policy as well. So then I want to talk just a moment about COMAR, because we talk about COMAR a lot in our work. And in the space of curriculum, I highlighted item number 2, because COMAR really does make it clear that we have to have a standardization and quality expectations around curriculum, and how we think about certified teachers, making sure we have assessments, that we have school operations and things all aligned to make sure that these things are of high quality. And I think it's important that if you look on the right side of the slide where we have those content and subject areas, each of those are called out in COMAR. So within COMAR, there is specific language about computer science, about fine arts, about career and technology education. So literacy, like all the like there. So that's an important thing about what already exists to guide and inform our IGE. And again, it becomes for us, part of our North Star for how we're ensuring that we are aligned with what the state is requiring from us. If we go to the next slide, this is where we right now currently find ourselves in our IGE policy. So it outlines how City Schools defines, implements, and reviews curriculum. And it also provides what we call a management plan and a curriculum landscape across pre-K through 12. So again, we've got some documents already that we bring forward to the board annually around how we look at our curriculum materials, and the full landscape of what we use across multiple subject areas. And so that's a real big part of what's already in IGE, already in IGE. But then if you look down at the letter numbers A, B, and C, you can see also that in our current policy, we talk about high quality curriculum that's aligned with, again, those state, local, and national standards. We talk about the importance of having programs that give high quality to ensure equitable access, and making sure that, again, we have a plan for how we manage that. So we've already got quite a bit in IGE that aligns with what the law and COMAR requires. But again, we need to revisit it in light of some of the most recent information that I shared about some changing things. Okay, if we go to the next slide. So in our current components, as I mentioned, the policy gives the purpose for the policy. It has a set of definitions and it has standards. You can see there, this is a real sort of robust area around curriculum, how we implement, certainly how we think about instructional materials, and then most recently, some work about our library media programming. And that's been, again, an important part of the work. In IGERB, you can see here again, we've dug into some of the media center scheduling and things, some of our work around community outreach, how we think about reconsideration for a text or a book. Again, all of these things are the current components, and some of the regulations we've done have done recently, and some needs a fresh set of eyes as we're, again, haven't looked at this closely since 2019. So, what do we already have? And again, some of these things are distinct and some of them overlap. So as we've talked about, in the blue circle, you can see we have a clear curriculum management plan. We have curriculum landscape that we work on. We have high quality instructional materials in English language arts, in math, and in science. And each of those subject areas have scopes and sequences that, again, our teachers use to inform their day-to-day lessons. In terms of the communication that we do around there, we have annual board presentations about our curriculum. We have family guides. We have course syllabus. We, again, have the upcoming work that we'll be launching in our learning management system, Canvas. And we also have course of study, which we see in our 6 through 12 space that articulates the different courses that our students in middle and high schools can take. And then we also have this area of strategic plans. So within city schools, there are strategic plans for CTE, so that's our career technical education, fine arts, literacy, math, and multilingual learners. And there are places where these things overlap, and there are places where these things are distinct. And so I think that I think what this signals is we've got a lot of different materials or resources or supports when it comes to curriculum. And again, we want to just think about how these align and how these things are integrated. I think the other thing that City Schools has done quite well is had this real clear commitment about how we think about curriculum. So we're always thinking about our COMAR requirements. We are always aligning with what policy tells us, the board's priorities. We've articulated district goals. We have our equity policy, the portrait of a graduate work we've done. Again, there's just a number of different pieces that all feed in to this place of curriculum. And I think that's important as we're trying to get at a streamlined and a very coherent body of work around curriculum. So if we go to the next slide, I wanted to illuminate out when we talk about COMAR, what exactly that means. And so I'm not going to read this slide. The print is very, very small. But what I want to just highlight here is that the level of specificity that COMAR digs into, for example, in this case, ELA and literacy, really does drill down what are the expectations for these instructional programs in grades pre-K through 12. And you can see they call out very specific aspects about the types of programs and such. And they're also anchored with the Maryland College and Career Readiness Standards in ELA. So these things work together. The COMAR piece alongside those standards gives us a whole lot of information about what we must do in city schools to ensure our students have access to strong ELA curriculum and programming. And so on top of that work, we also have a literacy plan. So because of this being a core area, City Schools has gone above and beyond what COMAR requires and has articulated a very clear way in which we are focused on strategic improvement work in the area of literacy. So the team has identified priorities. There are clear places of monitoring our progress towards those priorities. There are ways that we organize professional learning in alignment with them. So again, the strategic plan really buttresses up the work that's already laid out for us in COMAR and in our standards. So I want to give another example because this one feels particularly relevant in the space of fine arts. So again, COMAR does a really clear job of telling us what we must have in place around programming in fine arts, requirements around dance, media arts, music, theater, visual arts, again, for our programs pre-K through 12. And in addition to that, Maryland has a set of fine arts standards. So these pieces, similar to how I laid it out in ELA and literacy, show up both in COMAR and in our standards. If we go to the next slide, similarly to literacy, we have identified that fine arts is an area to invest further work in our strategic plan. And within that, the team has gone through and had very clear goals articulated that are monitored regularly and are brought to the board for an annual report out and presentation. So again, in both literacy and in fine arts, we have a set of robust information informing our curriculum work. We have our COMAR guidelines, we have our state standards, and we have our strategic plans. And these things work quite nicely to provide a comprehensive way that we're ensuring that we are putting forward program and curriculum that's of the highest standards. And again, in the space of each of these areas, those are monitored quite tightly because they've got clear goals in them. And that allows for us to, again, in the case of the fine arts plan, we just upped a new 5-year plan so that it, again, holds us at that level of, the vigilance and the monitoring. So if we go to the next slide, we want to think about as we bring forward this framing conversation of like what's next for us as we're jumping in to this conversation around how do we dig into IGE. We want to do some benchmarking. We want to look at other curriculum policies in sort of similar districts, similar size, similar demographics, and see how they approach curriculum. Do they have specific content areas, specific policies? How do other LEAs, both here in Maryland, I think is important to see how they meet the COMAR requirements, and then how do other large urban districts grapple with sort of the full set of curricular areas in their policies. We want to build an internal work group to get us into this conversation to make sure that we are looking at all of our existing resources. We want to make sure that we're working closely with the team that's getting ready to launch the LMS, the Learning Management System, to make sure that whatever we revise in our policy aligns tightly with our learning management. And then we have to think a bit about what would, in light of what this policy is about, what would meaningful engagement look like? Because I want to really differentiate this from when we think about when we adopt new curriculum materials. So for example, a few years ago, we brought on new English materials. Well, that level of stakeholder engagement was very robust. We engaged students, we engaged teachers, families, principals, because we were bringing on new curriculum. This IGE is not about bringing on any new curriculum. It's just about us organizing our definitions, our alignment to any state policies. So we want to make sure we're hitting the right level of engagement. And we know that having this internal work group, having teachers involved, because we know teachers experience curriculum, that feels very important. But we're just mindful of like, what's the right level? Because this is not about bringing on new math curriculum or new English curriculum. So again, as I framed earlier, we'll come to policy in November, and then there's first readers scheduled for January and then in March. So let's jump to the framing conversations. Again, so in light of all that we've shared, just want to talk through the benefits of having content area specific policy. I think particularly there's been the question around fine arts policy and sort of what's the benefits of that, what's the implications or unintended consequences for codifying specific content area into policy. How might policy refer to our strategic plans more explicitly, and how could that look? And as I mentioned, how do we approach stakeholder feedback for this policy IGE? And is there anything else that we're missing or that we need to include as we go into this benchmarking work between now and November? So those are the questions for the discussion. Commissioner Esposito, I will turn it back to you, and happy to engage in conversation.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, this is something that's definitely interested me. And I saw that you mentioned that fine arts is going to be integrated into other subjects like math. Is there any plans to really connect the fine arts to what we're doing around like wholeness and the conversations that we're having with mental health? And then the other question that I had is, well, I'll ask the other question after that.
Yeah, no, I think the space for fine arts hitting at multiple parts of the organization, I think absolutely the space around wholeness is certainly a place that we want to, I think, emphasize and continue to emphasize, because we do see that things such as opportunities for students to be involved in instrumental music groups or plays, productions, those kinds of things, bring a level of engagement that moves beyond academics. So I think we see that in places. I would have to go back and check in the fine arts strategic plan to see if that is called out specifically, but I don't know that it would show up in the curriculum policy. But to your point around arts integration, both in math and in ELA, there are strands of our work that do touch upon that integrated approach. Again, for, I think somebody's got, I'm hearing feedback. There we go. Thank you. I do think there are opportunities for us to have integrated arts programming in some of those very specific areas.
Awesome. And my other question was around curriculum policy. How does that ensure that, as, school leaders may have to like work with their budgets? And I know we've gotten testimony in the past of certain art programs like being cut. How does the strategic plan and the curriculum policy like kind of stabilize the access to fine arts?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So a couple of things. I think one thing that we've been talking a lot about is how we are codifying the budgeting pieces, the budget guidance that schools receive each year around, again, as we go back to the slide that mentioned COMAR, there are those areas in COMAR that have hiring and programming expectations built in as must-dos. And so schools have to be able to show evidence in their budget that those COMAR regulations are being met. And so that is the way it shows up. Right now, I don't know, and we certainly, I think this is a great thing for us to think through, how might we reference or how might it show up in curriculum policy, aspects around the required mandatory aspects of some of these pieces, because similar to science and math, fine arts is not an optional piece of programming. It's required in COMAR. So in the same way, we wouldn't allow a school to move forward without a science teacher. They have to also have a fine arts teacher. Now, what we have sometimes experienced, though, is if there are hiring challenges and a school is not able to fill its vacancy, they reach a point, and what we've done over the past few years is we have kept that position open as long as we can until we realize that we're a place where if a school cannot fill its vacancy, we allow the position to be abolished only as a sort of last effort to ensure that we can get some kind of access to fine arts programming through an external vendor. So something like OrcKids might come in and provide an opportunity for those students to receive music, because if we aren't able to hire. But the hiring expectations for any COMAR area are set. So the same thing happens with librarians. That's another space where, again, required by COMAR, and if we hit a point where we can't find a librarian, we have to allow a school to say, well, you know what, I'm actually going to put a paraeducator in that space so that I can at least have kids coming in and accessing books. So we sort of hold out as long as we can. And I will say human capital has been a huge help for us, and we've done much better at getting those vacancies filled. But that's one way we try to protect around that.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll open it up for questions from others. Commissioner Sally?
Thank you. One area that I wanted to note that I think is an opportunity, as I'm reading through the framing questions that are here, is also for us to consider resourcing. And I know there's a number of different ways to kind of look at resourcing to support the vast array of things that are transpiring across our curriculum, but it may be helpful to know, which areas need additional supports and resources. Which areas do we need to start to lean on external partners in different ways? And I'm going to look at arts integration, for example, where we know in certain school communities where they may or may not have access to a full-time, range the gamut of art expertise in this space, and where we need to rely on community partners or other resources to help us. But I would love to know, as you guys are kind of setting out to revise this policy, are the resourcing question, because I think that helps us to understand with fidelity, how do we ensure that curriculum is being implemented to the robustness, to the level of exposure that we would like to have, or that are, actually, let me say that last part again, that our young people deserve to have as part of their educational experiences.
Yep. And I think there are ways that we can do a better job codifying that in policy and thinking through what that might mean in areas where we know we have, because I would say the other spaces, for example, world languages, where we may not be able to find a world language teacher, and we need our young people to be able to learn Spanish or French or such. And so what are we doing around resources in places where we may not be able to find the certified teachers? Because COMAR does talk about certified teachers. And so what are our sort of guidance points or pieces in policy around that? So that makes good sense. That's helpful.
And then a second point that I wonder, and help me understand or think about this, Dr. Dabrowski, in a way in which is accretive to all the good work that the system has done, especially around Portrait of a Graduate. But I'm also thinking about on the other end of this, which is the connection to CTE, and how do we start to look at ensuring that anything that we do covered underneath this policy helps to ensure that our young people have a well-rounded educational experience in a way in which, helps our young people think about career exploration. It helps them to think about higher ed aspirations. It helps them to think about a connection to where there are apprenticeships or fellowships or internships or even paid work experience that will lead them to a robust, well-rounded life outside of city schools or after city schools.
Yep. No, that's great. And actually, that is one of the reasons the most recent iteration of MSDE's CCR Ready policy that they've put forward lays out a lot of information about CTE progressions. They've got new content standards in all of those CTE pathways. So that's all some of the work that has to go into this revision. So you will certainly, I think, see a bigger emphasis in this updated policy around CTE, because I think the state's given us a lot more that they want to see in our schools when it comes to CTE apprenticeships, all the things that you've just mentioned. So yes, agreed.
Okay. And it'd be helpful too, as you guys are doing that landscape analysis, to understand, where there are gaps, or where do we need to, build relationships, partnerships, expend a little bit more capital to make sure that we're, creating real strong and tight coupling with CTE programming. Those are the two I'll lift up for now.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ames Messenger?
Yeah, I can kind of build on that thought of Rob, and by means of shouting out where we are doing great things. I got to be with Baltimore Design School for graduation and got to speak with kind of their leadership of how they've been building out kind of having students graduate with certification and being a little creative of when you're dealing with fashion design, is that really is Adobe and Illustrator Suite certification kind of the logical space? So I was thankful to see that way of thinking that is happening already in the districts with a little bit of creativity to meet the blueprint and the Pillar 2 goals. I guess the question related to the framing is also wondering where this policy might need to support kind of collaboration outside of just like hiring, but even down to the level of like student scheduling. So thinking a lot of for music, for fine arts, or for language, for visual arts, like that, to be able to make sure that students are actually able to participate in options, even if staff is there, to be able to meet their credits and are able to take classes for multiple years in a building sequence, and just kind of how that fits into that framework.
Got it. Yep, no, I think those are all things that are that'll be helpful as we start to move into the work group conversations, and thinking about how schedules and sample schedules might be nice to include. Okay.
One other final thought, which I know is something that's been coming up in this morning operations meeting, is just also looking at how are we creating, tracking the data on this, and looking at like how are we looking at the number of folks in each of these disciplines, like kind of where are they, what is the certification? I know you touched that, but I was just exciting to see that continue to be part of a larger strategic plan of how we deal with data in the district in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yep, and I think that's where I think having the strategic plans in particular areas really does keep us vigilant on the data. So again, like for fine arts, because we've been in that strategic plan and we've been watching our hiring over time, we can track where we've made great gains in the number of teachers. Similar in CTE, we're now tracking the number of kids that are in certain pathways. Have they taken 1? Have they taken 2 or 3? Are they concentrators? And so I think strategic plans do that work quite well, and they're very nimble because we can be looking at them all through the year and then having sort of annual moments where we sort of report that out. But teams internally are tracking it throughout the year, each quarter, in some cases monthly, to sort of see where we are. And I think strategic plans have a nimbleness to them that's different than policy, which is why, again, back to those like overlapping circles, I think some of these things work really nicely together, and maybe having this curriculum policy sort of reference those strategic plans as things that work in concert with policy might be another thing that we think about.
Awesome. Any other questions? Commissioner Sally, or Chair Sally?
Yeah, and just one additional consideration, Dr. Dabrowski. So kind of early in my tenure on the board, one of the things that we did, going back to that point around resource allocation and mapping, we looked a little bit, and I can't remember if you were in this role or not, where we started looking at resource mapping, especially when it comes to fine arts. It may be helpful to kind of dust off some of that work again to like help the board understand, those rich community assets that are additive in this work and how we're leveraging that. I think that also, one of the things the board is interested in is building stronger community bonds, and that looks a number of different ways. So we're wanting to make sure that we're leveraging, our corporate partners as good, who want to be good corporate citizens, that help us in just different respects. But as well as knowing where we've got a lot of richness and other kind of assets around the city that we want to tap into. So I wonder, to the extent possible, where we have that information available to us, is there an opportunity to leverage some of that within the work that's going to transpire the next couple of months?
So I think, it's a great question. I think part of what we have to strike a balance and get comfortable, or some, I think, norming around, which would be helpful is that because of the way curriculum is moved very close with sort of the law around standards and very clear things that we need to be working on in service of, in some cases, MCAP, exams, we need to ensure that any external partners, groups, vendors are aligned, and that City Schools is driving that curricular focus. And so one part that I think has been I think helpful for us is working with vendors, partners who are very clear on wanting to be tightly aligned with that. But if
Mhm.
organizations are coming in with their own areas of focus and such, what can happen sometimes is it pulls people away from the core work. And so I think there's got to be a balance of that. I think I would, but I certainly know that there are places where, and again, I use the example of Orc Kids as a great one, because I know that we've had some schools that could not get that FTE in place or wanted to do an FTE alongside having even more robust support from Orc Kids to get their instrumental music stronger. We want to make sure that we know about that and our affirming of that as approach and for schools to be able to do that. So I think that that's there. But
Okay.
what I get nervous about is when a partner or a vendor becomes a replacement or a proxy for what is
Mhm.
our responsibility according to COMAR and the standards of, the Maryland state standards. So I think that's just the pieces there. But I think knowing, to your point, like where are our resources? Where are there not enough resources? Because I think we sometimes find ourselves that some schools get a lot and then other schools are left scrambling. And we have to sort of think about that equity of resources too. So I would want us to kind of dig into that as well.
Well, yeah, all those things you
Yep.
lifted up are really important considerations. Thank you.
Yep.
And I think that's helpful for the board, to consider as you kind of frame out the revisions to the policy.
Yep. So I think, a question that I think we have, and as the team starts to go forward, is a sense from the board around how we look towards this integrated, more robust curriculum policy, as opposed to, again, having disparate content-specific policies. And I think as we're trying to move into it, if the board has strong feelings on one way or the other, I think, going to that first question is like, what are the pros and cons or implications of singular policies versus, again, how do we use strategic plans to augment like existing expectations from COMAR and our state standards? And again, I'm thinking again about like math. Math has got a new policy from the state. Math has a strategic plan. Math has COMAR. Math has, standards. So like, I don't think we need to have a separate math policy. And so there is some of that, I think, that is just up for conversation as we start to move in this IGE review.
So, and one thing that comes to mind for me is thinking about progress monitoring, and how we do that together. I think it lends itself to enhancing how the information that's brought to the board on a semi-annual basis in terms of our implementation shows us or gives the board a little bit greater insights into the things that you guys are managing across the curricular policy, and like how those things translate into how well our learners are learning for a variety of ways in which we want to look at that question. So not just performance against standards, which is really important to do, like through our formal assessments and other interim assessments, but also how those things also align with the things that you talked about, Dr. Dabrowski, in terms of our portrait of a graduate and other things that we know are and helpful for CTE realm. And so I think it's the progress monitoring is where I'm going. That might be an opportunity that lends itself to greater insight.
And I'll add on to that. I think for me, it's really affirming as a district our commitment to access to arts and like recognizing it as a strength, but also as a board member wanting to be able to see like what that access looks like, and whether or not, like based on past testimony that we've received about when an arts teacher or a program is not at a school anymore, like does that have an impact on enrollment? I know for me, like when I'm looking at schools and like that's one thing that I want to see. And now that I've visited so many schools and seen what programs look like at some schools versus others, I do think that drives, where people want to send their kids. So yeah, I really want us to just say like, this is going to be a focus, because I do feel like not just in our district, but just broadly, like arts is very vulnerable, like different from the other subjects.
Yeah, and I think I've thought a lot about that since we've started these conversations around that, and I'm wondering if in our IGE revision, if it's a calling out of exactly that, the places where we do know there are vulnerabilities, or I think it's the pro language that you just said. It's the affirming our commitment around fine arts and a double down of that and calling that out within IGE so that it is sort of named. And I feel a similar way for, say, for example, world languages, like other places where I know our students deserve and should have experiences with this content area and these areas. So I just wonder if there's ways. And I think that's where the benchmarking will help us, like looking at how other LEAs do this and how do other large urban districts call out their fine arts work. Like, I think that'll help us get some ideas for how we do that in a way that doesn't, I think, where I'm cautious about is going into sort of singular policies for each area, because I just think the management of those could become just cumbersome and challenging. And I think we already have really thoughtfully developed strategic plans that can help be energizers or catalysts for this work that I want us to continue to do. And so those are things I'm trying to think through. So I welcome like more thoughts and thinking on this, so that as we're using this time between now and November, we're able to sort of do some good iterations on this.
Does anyone have any other questions? Oh, and welcome, Commissioner Redding Lallinger.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Okay, I guess that's all. Thank you.
Thanks.
And next we have Administrative Regulation, AFD, RD, Student Wholeness and Support Services. And this is a memo.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. We are revising the City Schools Administrative Regulation, ADRRD, Student Wholeness and Supportive Services, in response to the House Bill HB 522, Public Schools Telehealth Appointments. This is state guidelines, policies, and access, which was signed by Governor Moore in April of last year, 2024. So this legislation is required the state of MSDE, the State Department of Education, and the Maryland Department of Health to develop state guidelines for school health services that gives availability to student participation for telehealth during the school day. In December of last year, both MSDE and MDH released the guidelines for the availability for school participation in telehealth appointments in secondary schools, and to local school boards, saying that they are required to adopt and implement the student health policy in accordance with the guidelines prior to the start of this school year coming. So we have added sections to the ADF policy on student health in order to comply with the Maryland law and the guidance from MSDE and MDH. Additionally, during 2025 legislation session, the Maryland General Assembly passed the Bill SB 310, which is the Youth Suicide Prevention Program and revisions, which was also signed by Governor Moore this past May in 2025. So we are also adding language to this regulation to regarding supports for students with potential suicide risks that aligns with training provided to school staff, and also highlights the connection between gambling addiction and suicide. So there are several things to keep in mind about this regulation. So the guidance is is not prescriptive, nor is it direct. We do have the flexibility to make adjustments when needed around this guidance. Every LEA at this point is trying to figure out how to come to a benchmark place about this, but they're also taking their time to try to figure this thing out. So we're looking at this year as being a trial run so we can see how it goes, be reflective, come back to the table, and next year possibly make some changes if necessary based on the feedback that we are receiving. And this is not something that we are also choosing to do, but also obligated to meet the requirements of the set guidance from MDH. So we want to make this policy, incorporated with the guidance, and we recognize that there are going to be some challenges with this. We had an extensive time going over that and collaborating. So this is new across the state, and so we do not have any schools that facilitate this process, but we are mirroring this based upon our experience with our vendor that we have Hazel Health with. So what ADF and RD regulations intends to do is offer the students the opportunity to telehealth appointments in the school setting with the hopes that it reduces absenteeism and minimizes time students spend away from class for medical appointments, and also to support our students with mental health services to support student well-being. So currently we have a formal agreement with Hazel Health to provide telehealth services in grades K through 12. So this partnership right now currently allows easier access to mental health supports. With this process, both the principal and or designee works directly with Hazel Health and their school student wellness support team to facilitate the telehealth appointments based on the administrative approved scheduling, and to also to ensure students are supported as they transition to and from these appointments. So since students have access to telehealth appointments through the city school partnership with Hazel Health, the revisions we are seeking is to ensure that the parent-student initiated telehealth appointments are not overused. We also recognize that that the benefits of access to the telehealth appointments during the school day can be of great support, but also can bear weight against the administrative burden, which could also impact student learning. So overall, the goal is to integrate the appropriate balance to the revisions in the regulations. So there were several challenges that we had to consider when working to update ADF. One was the training and implementation of the new telehealth policy for administrators and staff. We had to acknowledge that in certain situations, this option would be helpful for some students and families, but also recognizing challenges are real, but are few with some appointments. So we were thinking that many of the appointments may be brief and may not require a great deal of loss of student learning. Some schools also right now have struggled with Hazel Health to accommodate these appointments within the school day, as well as the appropriate spacing for the confidential visits. And then currently the student wellness support team provides support to the Hazel students during the school day with their telehealth appointments and class transitions. This will not be the case for the student parent initiated telehealth visits. So the proposed regulations require that the parent and guardian be present for all of the child student parent initiated visits, as well as the physician visits, and while continuing to make sure that there is a clinical staff support on hand in I want to say in case of a crisis. So the most appropriate protocol for the administration staff and the parents with respect to parent-student initiated requests for the telehealth is the location, the access to technology, and communication to parents. We wanted to make it clear in the policy revisions that the same supports that the students use in Hazel Health would not be the same for the student or parent-initiated appointments. Also, principals and their designee will have that flexibility to in providing particular appointments. We predict that only a small amount of parents may take advantage of these opportunities. Also, the parents have to be physically present in the school and or online. Otherwise, the principal may opt to cancel the appointment and or make this a deciding factor if their future, if that particular student and family should have future meetings. Now, we did this because we did not want the sole responsibility to lie on the principal to manage the process. So some of the revisions that we made, particularly in Section 2, Section 2M, which are our supports for students with the potential suicide risk, highlight that city schools employees are trained on suicide prevention and immediate intervention to include parent contact and support. Section 2N, which is access to student health, is to comply with the Maryland law and guidance from MSDE, MDH, and that also highlights our equitable access to student health services, the administrative process for parent requests, confidentiality, and space appointments. This section provides the distinction between the school provider-initiated and or student-parent-initiated appointments. It also highlights the parental responsibility requests for appointments and consideration to IEP and 504 students. Lastly, in Section 11P, communications with students and families was added to ensure that city schools share links to this particular regulations within our student handbook, family guide, and also communication to ensure that all our staff are aware of the new telehealth protocols, health services, and other wholeness supports, student support services. So again, this collaboration was done with equity in mind. We wanted to ensure that, we wanted to ensure that everything was reviewed, that students had access to participate, highlight the draft and the policy, and also these revisions were based on the feedback from principals, other school staff in relation to the challenges that were faced with our 2024-25 Hazel telehealth integration. Any questions? I know that's a lot.
Yeah, I'll open it up for questions.
I can kick us off. So realizing, especially with younger students, that a lot of the time while these can be provided virtually, there is definitely a difference of quality and interaction. It's hard to do play-based therapy virtually. Looking at kind of what is the mechanisms, and you're like, it's different if we're talking about a psychologist, someone who can prescribe, thank you. Looking at how are we ensuring that that school teams are working with parents to appropriately triage kids to the place of best fit, and then realizing that there are, like differences of services, and then also looking at to make sure how are we managing. We have school-based partners that are, billing for services and are required to bill at a certain level in order to ensure that they can stay in a school. And so kind of what are the mechanisms in place to ensure that we're keeping those additional partners with caseloads at a level that we're not all competing for the same pot of students.
So
Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Courtney Pate, Director of the Office of Health and Specialized Student Services. I just want to frame that this is not just mental health services. So the law mandates that we provide telehealth availability for all students. So this is also in line with your child broke their leg, need to follow up with ortho, but we know ortho isn't really going to do anything, but talk to us about 15 minutes about how things went. Then this is an opportunity for them not to have to leave school to go do it. Seeing as how the principal or their designee is driving availability of student, there will be a fulcrum of collaboration between school and family about what appointments are available or need to be done when. If a child is having interactions with an external mental health provider, the internal mental health provider, either the ESBH provider or that school social worker, would need to be made abreast that that appointment is happening because they can't both bill on the same day for the same service. So bottom line, we got to talk to each other.
And I guess just from a, which I appreciate, you're like, this is so many moving parts. It is complicated. And some of that is I appreciate how you began this conversation, right? Like, we're going to pilot and see how it works in the first year. Do we have mechanisms that are kind of looking to preempt some of those issues ahead of time?
So our experience has been that not many of our families are utilizing outside providers, especially outside of mental health providers. So we haven't seen the need to like kind of get ahead of that 8 ball, so to speak. A lot of the concern from our district as well as others has been like this law was made and put in place, but we don't know if the people it was put in place for are the actual people who are going to utilize and benefit from it. So we're just testing the waters at this point. Our colleagues in other districts are like, we're supposed to be teaching and learning. I don't understand why we have to do this type situation, but everyone's just doing their best in this moment.
I appreciate you keeping us in compliance with state law. So thank you.
And one other thing just to add is that the regulation building off the guidance has very clear factors in it for schools to consider, supported by the awesome staff of Dr. Pate and Dr. Sase to factor in when it's appropriate to have a visit and when it may be disruptive. So I think that's what we're going to be acutely aware of as we go through this.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think a big piece of for us is just to get some data to move from. So like we get a couple things going, we see how it goes, then we can pivot.
Any other questions? Okay, awesome. Thank you. And next on the agenda, we have Administrative Regulation JRA-RA, Procedures for Maintenance and Release of Student Records.
And I can start, and then this is Josh Sivan, and presenting is going to be Caitlin Barnes, who's our legal fellow in this office. This is our first board presentation, so she's done a great job working with OAA on this, the Office of Achievement and Accountability, and she's going to co-present with Holly Bedwell-Benton from OAA. So turning it over to Caitlin and to Holly.
Thank you, Holly. I'll let you go first. Can you all see the screen? Is it up? All right, so we're sharing revisions to Administrative Regulation JRA-RA, which are procedures for the maintenance and release of student records. These revisions were developed collaboratively between the Office of Legal Counsel, the school's office, and the Office of Achievement Accountability. And they ensure that City Schools continues to protect student privacy and align with revisions to other board policies and regulations. The revisions also are consistent with the annual student verification process that City Schools launched this year to provide parents and guardians with the opportunity to update their contact information and other critical information annually. As a general rule, City Schools does not release or disclose any student information unless required by law. Under FERPA, school districts are allowed to release a student's directory information without parent consent, as long as parents or guardians or eligible students have the opportunity to opt out. However, because legal restrictions apply, schools are instructed to consult with OLC before sharing directory information. So directory information may include a student and or parent or guardian's name, address, email, and phone number, field of study, grade level, participation, and recognized activities or sports, degrees and awards received, school of attendance, enrollment status, dates of attendance, photo, and weight and height of members of athletic teams. Finally, a reminder that City Schools also follows Maryland law regarding the maintenance of certain documents, which include bullying, harassment reports, child abuse and neglect reports, reports of gang activity, and reportable offenses. These documents are maintained separately from a student's educational record and are not part of the student's cumulative record. With that, I will pass it to Caitlin to talk about the regulatory revision process.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to walk through some of the revisions in a little bit more detail. So the first bucket of revisions we made is about the list of information that is identified in this regulation that is considered directory information. So Holly just shared the current version of directory information, and we've made a few tweaks to that in this round of revisions. So first, we've removed place of birth from the list of directory information, and we have also changed dates of attendance to dates of school enrollment. So removing place of birth, this is consistent with our existing practice of not asking about or disclosing student immigration status, and it also reflects our current definition that we have on the website of directory information and how we communicate with families through the ASV process. And then the change from dates of attendance to dates of school enrollment, that was supposed to be included the last time that this was revised. It was inadvertently omitted, and so we're just making sure to include it this time around. The other edit that we've made regarding directory information is that we've added some language to clarify that if a law enforcement agency is requesting directory information, that request needs to come through school police and the Office of Legal Counsel. And unless there is an information sharing that's permitted under the MOU with the Baltimore Police Department, the Office of Legal Counsel needs to review those requests before any directory information is released. So then the second bucket of changes is aimed at bringing this regulation into alignment with Maryland law about reports of gang activity and reportable offense information. So like Holly shared, Maryland law says that these documents have to be kept separate. They are not part of a student's educational record. And so we have added some language to this regulation to clarify that practice. Third, continuing on with the trend of making sure that this regulation is aligned with Maryland law, we've added some language to reflect a change to COMAR as it relates to reportable offenses. So COMAR now requires that whenever a student with a reportable offense transfers from city schools to another school system in Maryland, City Schools has to notify that student's new school system of the reportable offense information if the charge is still pending or if the student was convicted or found guilty of the reportable offense. So we have been following that since the regulation, since COMAR was changed back in the fall, and we just wanted to make sure we added some language to this regulation to reflect that update to Maryland law. We've also added a little bit about student health records. So we are transitioning from paper health records in school health suites to maintaining those documents electronically on Infinite Campus. So we've added language to reflect that transition. And then finally, we've made some technical revisions to the retention of student records. So we looked at the Maryland Student Records Manual, and we really tried to clarify and streamline all the various retention schedules that are a part of a student's cumulative file, right? Because there's the student's cumulative folder, but they might also have a discipline folder. They might also have a multilingual learner folder or a disabilities folder. And so we've tried to the extent possible, streamline the retention so that it's clear how long everything has to be kept. And to the extent possible, those timelines are consistent with one another. And then the last change we made was Under FERPA, an eligible student is a student who turns 18 years old. And we've added some language to clarify that if an eligible student is a dependent of their parent or guardian, the school system can continue to provide student records and information to the student's parent or guardian. So if the student turns 18 during their senior year of high school, it's not like the school system has to immediately stop communicating with the parent or guardian. As long as the student remains a dependent, the school can continue sharing that information like they did before. And then Holly already shared how this was very much a team effort to get these revisions made. And then the sources that we looked at were FERPA, COMAR, the records manual, and of course our other board policies and regulations, just to make sure that everything was aligned.
Thank you. I'll open it up for questions. Commissioner Ames Messenger.
I feel like I've been talking a lot. Does somebody else want to go first?
Oh, no, you're fine.
All right, here we go. So I have a couple of questions, and thank you for working on this as we think about how do we streamline the data that we have and how we communicate that to parents. As a parent of a young child going through enrollment, like these are not always clear processes, even when you come as a pretty informed user. So I appreciate it. I think some of this is getting to the point, or like question for opt-in and opt-out about how that is being messaged to parents. Like, is it clear? What are the stakes of people opting in and opting out at the student level? Does that mean they don't get to participate in things? Is that clear to parents that, like what they do and don't do? Is it just scholarships? Kind of like, what does that process look like functionally, and what feedback are we getting from end-use stakeholders, from parents and kids, about the accessibility of that process? Clearly, I have my own child with me today.
I can say that opt-out is part of our family guide. So that is one way that it is communicated to families and parents, and also through our website.
And that family guide is no longer sent home in print. So what's the mechanism of guaranteeing that parents have access and kids have access, especially folks who might be concerned about where their information is going?
Yeah, it's also available as part of our annual student verification process. So students are
It's not one of our clearest processes in existence.
And I can add as well that that's part of, so there are messaging that the communications office does specifically in back to school about the new back to school documents that we release every year, which is the family guide, the student rights and responsibility, the student code of conduct. So that's a package that we push out. We also did work in the context of immigration resources to put out parent-facing information about the implications of opt-out. And we unlike some school districts where it's all or nothing, you just opt in. Our opt-out form gives different options to families. So one of the things that we've worked on this spring is clarity with the Office of Information Technology and OAA, where Holly works, to make sure schools clearly know how to monitor who in their school has opted out. But I think to your point, Commissioner Ames Messenger, we need to continue to be better and just making sure that parents are clear about their options and the pros and cons, right? Is if you're opting out of this information, you may not be able to be in the playbill for the school's play, right? Those are some of the pieces where this, if it's an all or nothing, we have to think it through with families. And that's why it's also okay to update this at any point as people go through the process. And I think I think you heard Caitlin and Holly mention that even with releasing directory information, we want to have circuit breakers there too. So we're also thinking as a school district about because this is something that we can release, but we also can have precautions, but that we have precautions about where we're releasing those and how.
I have one follow-up actually on that end of things. I have a couple of questions. I can let other commissioners go first, but before wrapping that up, I did want to just list for specific, if there's an option of seeing what that language looks like. Hold on one second, I'm sorry. Second, if you could provide that just before it comes to the board for a vote, it would be helpful to have like the specific language thinking about accessibility.
I'm sorry, just to be clear, the specific language on the form or what specific language?
I'm so sorry. As you can tell, it's the first day of school and there's limited summer camp. I did have a follow-up question if there wasn't another one on deck. Go. Okay. I think some of that is you had
Emily,
talked about. Oh, yep. Go ahead.
So, no, it's not a question. I think Chief Seven was asking for clarification on what language you were, what specific language you're hoping for when it comes before the board.
I think like actually what it shows up for students. So when they're getting that packet released, like what does it look like in terms of what parents are reading? I think some of that is thinking about, you know, we talk a lot about multi-language learners, but some of that is also like a reading accessibility thing. What's happening if we have parents that aren't, that have literacy kind of in a different framework. And even for parents that are informed, that we have an understanding of what that means and what are the costs of those decisions. Because while it's good to have nuance and options, sometimes that can become more overwhelming. So looking at that specific language that is ultimately going to be going out to families in mid-August, just I would be interested. I can move on to the next question. The next phase of that question, again, I'm so sorry, is looking at kind of getting at that point of like having those guardrails on releases. I really appreciate that. Realizing that also this is a changing thing of like, as student information changes, what is our end goal as a district has changed. So I appreciate that. But I'm looking specifically at, you know, if this information is in Infinite Campus, kind of what are the guardrails of how does it work? Who is notified when that information is happening? Also, at some point, if it's in Infinite Campus, how are we controlling for kind of accidental releases of information? Someone's going up to the secretary, oh, can I have X, Y, and Z? So I guess just a little more detail on what are the processes for what, and also I think some of that is the ultimate stopgap of not having an accidental release is that we don't have the data in the first place. And so what's kind of been the process for looking to purge some of those information that, you know, we're pulling out in the policy, but hypothetically could still exist and could be made public.
I think I'm sorry. I think I'm a little unclear on like what the specific question is. Just a general concern about if we collected things that we've removed, how are we making sure that we're getting rid of?
So example, we've taken the number of years enrolled in Baltimore City or whatever the term is. If we're removing that information from something that is being released in the directory, how are we ensuring that there aren't accidental releases of that information? Because if it exists and is available to school-based staff, while that is not the policy, we know always that in a system of 10,000 people, we won't always follow the policy. So kind of what are the stopgaps that are being put in place to ensure that information that we want to remain private remains private?
And I think one of the pieces is it starts with training, right? So we are now incorporating into the all staff compliance manuals a specific section on, or a module on, student privacy that OAA has developed. And we are updating language in the staff employee handbook that is very clear on what you should release and what not. But I think So we can do more, and we just had a conversation this morning about what additional training, if that's the 101, what's the 201 or 301 or 401 for principals, to make sure that they're also understanding what is data that should be releasable and what is data that we should exercise care in releasing.
And then the last kind of related thought is this something that we would get, like a compliance report, for example, like a list of when there have been specific requests for this data? And then, as you know, is that identifiable by school or pattern of like what the nature of the request is?
So I think that's a little tricky in terms of requests for opt-out, because often it's a request for an individual student, or it often comes up too when we have a request to for like a media station, like a TV station, to film in a class, right? And the way in which we work through opt-out would be that the school is supposed to check and say, Emily and Holly and Caitlin have opted out, so they're somewhere out. They can participate in the activity, but they're off camera. And so those are the types of things we work out. But it's not. But that's not necessarily something we track on a systematic basis. The tracking are more if somebody asks for, can I have all of the addresses of students in the district? And then that's going to go through the Public Information Act request. And we do have a compliance report on that.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Any other questions? Okay. That's all. Thank you. And we had 3 compliance reports this month. Board policy KDD, media relations, policy FCA, closing of schools compliance report for fiscal year 2024 and 2025. Compliance report IKEB, graduation standards, a district goal update. Were there any questions around those? Comments?
Yes, we're taking all, do you commit
just
chair all of them, or all of them at once?
Let's start with the first one. Let's start with board policy KDD, media relations. Any questions around that one specifically? Okay, let's go to policy FCA, closing of schools compliance report.
Sorry, actually, I'll ask a very quick question. It's not designed to be a long question around the media relation ones. It wasn't clear from the policy report, Andre, how many violations of this policy there actually were. You said very few and you weren't concerned about it, but do you have a number? Do you know how many violations of the policy there were?
No more than 3, Commissioner.
Okay.
And we didn't view them as significant at all. Sometimes folks just get aggressive and they may never read the policy. So we catch up to them. It's just a little counseling. Hey, next time, approach it this way. We don't want to beat people down and have them lose enthusiasm. But yeah, just no more than 3 for an
Sounds
entire
good.
year.
Okay, it doesn't seem too concerning. You don't seem too worried about it, so I'm not really worried about it. So thanks.
No, we're in a good place. Thank you.
All right.
And policy FCA, compliance for schools that closed between 2018, 2019, and 2020 and 2021 school years.
Yeah, I'd love for us to discuss this one a little bit more, I think in part because, we've had a lot of conversation on the board just about the district's footprint, the ways in which we go about mergers or closures and what that might mean for the future. So yeah, I'd love to ask a couple questions about this, if possible. I don't know who's taking these questions.
I'm here, and Lindsay Anderson. We're the 2 of us right here.
Oh, great. Hello. 2 of the hardest working people in city schools.
And we had our researcher, but she had to hop off because this what's in here came from our researcher. So.
Okay.
I think she might be trying to, excuse me, I'm sorry. I think she might be trying to call back in from her phone.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that's fantastic.
Great. Did you want me to wait for that, Angela, or do you
I
want me
think
just to go ahead?
start and then we can incorporate her in when she's in. I think you
Okay.
should start with your question.
Great. First, just a question around on page 5. You've got the chart that I've seen before that I really love of the percent of students in new or renovated buildings over time. The current place we're at now, in the
Are you in the report? We submitted our compliance report in August. And then what we were doing here is like an addendum on what the qualitative part. So is your questions about the August report? I just want to make sure I have the right document up. It sounds like your questions about the August report.
Yes, just a contextual question, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah. But I appreciate the clarification. So that would be page 5 of the original report.
Yeah, pulling that up right now. Okay, I am gonna get to page 5. Okay, I'm with you. Yes. Okay.
Just real quick, breaking out new from renovated buildings, about what percent? I'm trying to figure out how to ask this in a not too complicated way. But where we are right now, where about 30% of our students are in new or renovated buildings, and I don't need exact numbers, about how many is new versus renovated of that percent? No.
That's a good question, and I don't know that I can answer that cleanly. I mean, most of the time when we're talking about renovations, it's similar to new, just to be transparent with the public, because a lot of that was like 21st century. And so like a like for when we're talking about like 21st century buildings, that renovation is like floor to, it's everything inside is brand new. It's like we're keeping the frame, the building, like most of the time those buildings were historic. So the frame of the building or the particular wall that's historic stayed, but like everything inside was like redone. So it's essentially the same as new. They may include some renovations, but I can get back to you with a more precise question. I would have to partner with my colleagues in facilities who would know that breakdown at a much higher level than I do.
No worries. And then, sorry, just scrolling to my notes here. Can you talk through a little bit the sort of recommendations here to your addendum? Just because I think this is going to have implications for us moving forward. But you have this sort of recommendation section, and so I would just love to hear you speak to those a little bit.
Yep. And Lindsay, feel free. I don't know if you want to start or you want me to start, but so want to make sure you can chime in.
I think you can go ahead and get started, and I think Dr. Harrell also just jumped in too.
Okay,
So,
awesome.
Commissioner Wallinger, now you're speaking about the recommendations in the
addendum. Yeah, what you
addendum.
submitted for
Okay.
what you submitted for today.
Yeah. So one of the big findings. So there was a lot of like great findings in this report, and but one of the things I think the research that Dr. Harrell did for us reaffirmed is the importance of those human interactions with this group of schools that we did a review of. Some of that change while voted on prior got impacted during COVID, unexpected. We didn't know that was going to happen. And like since we've been back from that experience, all about how we like, including this meeting, work is very different than how we did. There's many more hybrid and virtual opportunities. And so one of the big things that I feel like we learned from the findings that Dr. Harrell gave us is just the importance of making sure that we're having some that those in person, because there's a you're trying to be convenient for parents, but just importance of those in person opportunities, how important that is. I think is key, and then it reaffirms the things that we do around identity, like that those are the right things. So the intentional focus on like naming and having aspects of the closing school visible to students and the families in that receiving school. And so like in the interviews, and Dr. Hall may want to speak to this, people talked about how that gave them comfort, being able to see that piece. The schools we looked at, many of them were elementary schools. And so that is a special time in everybody's life. There's a lot of core memories that are formed. There's your first best friend, your first, like, there's a lot of first time moments happening there. And so some of the people Dr. Help talked to, really talked about how seeing something that touched on that other school where that core memory was in the new school gave them comfort, helped them be able to have those fond memories. There was a student who talked about going to the playground to kind of remember like what it was like in her elementary school and how important those things are, and helping people process through the change. Because there's there's all the practical things that we're thinking about, but there's a real emotional component to this work. I think the other thing that was important too that we learned is, because we really focus a lot on the closing school side and how we're supporting that side of it, and we do work with like the receiving and trying to build community, but with the receiving school, because we're really trying to create something brand new that brings them together, they're losing something too, and there is some mourning of that change or some feelings around that change. And so one of the things too is helps us to think about how we do some of the activities that we do for a closing school. Like we work with partners to be able to do circles and have sort of like discussions, ways to process feelings and to like prepare for the new. We need to do some of that with the receiving school, not the school that is changing also, but not closing, is they're also going through an adjustment. And so I think that was one of the some of the interesting things that came out of the findings. And so I don't know if Lindsay wants to add to that. And Dr. Harrell, be good to have you introduce yourself and add anything to that question.
Absolutely. Thanks. I didn't want to cut you off, Lindsay. Did you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I think Angela outlined like some of the really specific takeaways that we got from your research. I think just overall, I would add, like, as a district, city schools, like, we invest a lot of like time and effort and resources into making sure we're doing these transitions very carefully and really like with the humanity of both schools at the center. And that's why we don't do closures like you see in other districts, like in, like Philadelphia or Chicago or other large cities where it's like 1 year and there's 10 closures. You can't do this process this way and have it done in that kind of volume. And so I think it just reaffirmed our approach and how important that is to the stakeholders who are experiencing these changes.
Yeah, I agree. I completely echo what both Angela and Lindsay are saying. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Tasha Harrell, and I'm a research scientist over at Johns Hopkins University's School of Education in the Everyone Graduate Center. And I had the pleasure and the opportunity of working both with Lindsay and Angela with collecting the data, and they pretty much summed up everything. I think the only thing a couple of points that I just would like to add on is, in addition to preserving and incorporating visible, symbolic, and cultural elements of the closed schools into the receiving schools, something else that was extremely important, particularly for students, was being able to see some members from their closed school at the receiving school or the combining school. For example, some of the students just felt like they were at home when they saw whether it was one or two teachers or, some of their peers. And also that was also important for the parents, just knowing that their student was going into a new environment, a new situation, but knowing that if there was at least one teacher there that they had already built that trust with, it made them feel more comfortable. Another thing that kind of came up was just the idea of trust came up across, I would say, all of the different areas. So we looked at the themes were kind of broken down into experiences at the closed school, and then the transition process, and then kind of how our schools now as a result. And so trust was something that kind of carried all throughout when they were able to build these lasting relationships when they were at their closed schools or at their previous schools. But the process of building and establishing trust kind of came up as kind of a theme throughout all of the transition process as well. It was kind of that trying to work to rebuild those relationships. And then once they finally did get those relationships established, that it was kind of a better place for all as a result. And in the it's been 3 to 4 years since the combinations. So and then I guess the final point was just the importance of the role that the school leader played, like them having a good understanding of the sentimentality and the emotional aspects around the closings and the transition process was just really important, and I think highlights the importance of continuing to prepare leaders with the transition process.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's helpful. It's a public meeting. I don't know if it might be helpful if we just kind of summarize there's like 5 key findings, just the outline of that might be helpful. And Dr. Harrell, I don't know if you want to do the honors of providing that summary of the 5 main takeaways.
Sure. So the first one was that school community members from closed and receiving schools, they held very vivid and cherished memories of their schools prior to the school closures. The second one was, again, preserving and incorporating both visible, symbolic, and cultural elements of closed schools within the receiving schools, and also opportunities to establish shared goals as a combined community helps kind of build that unified school community. Or unified school communities. And then the third was all of the stakeholders, so students, educators, school leaders, as well as parents, they value having the closure, understanding that their school was closing and just kind of time to process that, but also having opportunities for the human-to-human interactions when closing and combining schools. So kind of building on what Angela had previously mentioned. The fourth one, again, was the empathetic and visionary school leaders play a critical role in the school transition process. And finally, the fifth finding was, in general, after a school transition, most of the school communities report feeling more like a family, that they have more opportunities for grade level collaboration, and then also highlighted some career growth for educators and staff. And then just overall, they have increased access to resources. So those were the 5 core findings from the study.
Thanks for that. One more question that this sort of brings to mind, and this might be more for Lindsay and Angela, just on the city school side context. Edgewood was my first sort of time going through this process, and I think one of the things, Dr. Harrell, that you said that really resonates to me is that leadership matters. But it also seems to me like there are decisions around personnel, leadership, but other elements of this process that are going to make a big difference as to whether or not those sort of 5 principles you laid out really come out to bear when we're making these kinds of decisions. And I'm not quite clear on whether the timeline and the way in which we do it sort of allows for maximal opportunity to sort of like do all of those things well. But that's just a hunch that I have. And so I guess Angela and Lindsay, like, are there things about the timeline and the process by which, things come to, the recommendation is made, things come to the board, a decision is made, that either that you think, does it allow for enough time to do this process well, I guess is my question.
I think it does. I think the thing that's hard for you guys right now is school communities right now are still in the morning and not fully processed. And so having done this a long time, it's really in year two that people can start to reflect back and start to be in a different place. So if you talk to people now, they're feeling, especially with school closed, the last day of school being Monday, as we get closer to the last day, those feelings come back up because it's like the last time that they'll be in this space in this way. So there's a lot of emotion. So if you talk to people right now, or if you're talking to people like around this time, their emotions are high because these are these are kind of sacred relationships, like my child's first grade teacher, the first principal, right. So there's a lot of emotional feeling. So people are not in a space to be like pragmatic with us, or to be able to, or they don't even know what next year is going to be like yet. They haven't been into next year. And so I think one thing I would caution the board is having more perspective, us continuing this conversation again, like at the end of next year, right? Once they've experienced actually being in that space and that continued support. So one of the things that we changed about this process that started in 2018. Prior to 2018, we would do a legal process. We would do some support, right? But we would basically hand it over to the school's office and say, okay, well, you got a manager, you got LED, you got more people, right? Like it was a very like, you should be okay kind of thing. And we don't do that now. We add a layer of support with those folks. And continue to check on people to make sure the things that we committed to you and that we committed to the community actually happens. And so I think we had built in, sufficient time, but there's some contextual things that haven't happened yet for you to really be in a place to reflect on it, or for members of the community to be in a place to reflect on it. They're still in the unknown. There's still in the uncertainty. And every school community we do this with is experiencing a unique thing for themselves. They're not paying attention to what happened in these other communities. I will say, like, leaders are, especially if they've been up close, like there are some leaders who who've been able to witness our process and our supports, that in conversations with us has said, oh, I know, like if I have to go or change, I know what that looks like and I feel comfortable with your team. Like we've heard that feedback directly from leaders, right, who really care about making sure that we're supporting that. But I think I would say give it a little bit more time to see. But I do think that we have enough time because we're staying in relationship for that 3-year period with schools, and sometimes a little longer. We kind of, once we touch you, we kind of still circle back. Okay.
Yeah. So I guess I'll just close with a comment, which is I appreciate that. First of all, I really appreciate that perspective that, we're going to see some stuff. Part of what I hear you saying is, potentially some of the hardest moments are yet to come. But what I also hear you saying is that you're intentional about being there and providing the support over a period of time. I think my comment is, and I've said this many, many times, this is like the hardest thing that a school district can and has to do. It has gone disastrously wrong in many other cities. And I want to applaud the team for its really thoughtful approach to this, because I think the piece that people don't appreciate is like when you're in this position in terms of our sort of enrollment position and our building portfolio, is that you have to do this kind of thing for the benefit of students, right? Like it's the least popular thing to do, but if you do it thoughtfully and you do it well, it's actually because we want our kids to have more resources and more opportunities. And I don't think that message always comes through. So I appreciate that you all lead with that message, but that you also understand that even that sort of rational message doesn't always mean anything to a person if, they're no longer going to have their first grade teacher in the same building, if they're no longer get to walk to school like they did before. Like those emotional things mean much more to a person. And I appreciate that you all understand that and you put a lot of effort into that. And I say this again to say, and I think we should keep saying it out loud, we're likely, we have to have more of these, we're going to have more of these tough conversations because of the changing nature of the demographics of our city in terms of where kids are, where buildings are, our desire to get kids in better and newer buildings and give them more and better educational opportunities. So I think I applaud you on continuing to learn from the stuff that you're doing. And I just urge us to continue to put those things in practice, because I think, there's going to be more times like this ahead. So anyway, just appreciate the thoughtfulness, and even things like this of having a study done to get some insights to our folks who are most impacted by this, which is our kids, is super helpful. So thank you.
And there's no way I could do this without like the leadership of Lindsay Anderson. I just want to just make sure I'm saying that on the record. Like a lot of that engaging community and going deeper and thinking about naming and bringing in partners that we never even thought of would not have happened without Lindsay. So I just want to make sure that that's really, really clear how important her leadership is in this process.
Commissioner Ames Messenger.
Thanks. Building kind of on Stefan's thought, I think the first thing is like wondering too, no one wants to do this, and you're like, unless there is a financial pressure, and I wonder about ways to quantify the funds that are saved. And while that feels, Haji, I think to look at the significance of what that is. So I was just curious about kind of what has been done to kind of get at that number of what that is making of funds that are being made available for other things in kids when you're not having 2 principals and 2 janitorial staffs and. So I guess that was the first thought. And then the second one was building kind of on that long tail. And I'll start with just briefly saying, like, having worked in a building that has gone through substantial leadership and grieving processes, that you're like, there's the feeling that I feel while going through it. And then being able to look back 3 and 5 years later and saying, oh, I understand now. It was the right choice, even if it didn't feel good. And I guess I was wondering kind of what efforts have been made to quantify that and make sure, because I think like that is the end goal. And if that is not the case, if we're not able to show that that's what the data is saying afterwards, do we need to do something different in our process? So I guess I was wondering kind of for staff, for families especially, kind of what the perception qualitatively is this change. Are we getting to a point where they're going like, it might not have felt good, but I understand that it was the right choice for kids? Realizing that some of these school closures we're now reaching that kind of 3 to 5 year window.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we tried to do that. I mean, one of the things is like, this year's the first time we've done FCA compliance, like we updated the policy the year before. So I think that reporting, once we have enough data for schools, is one way. Every time we bring annual review, we report on what's happened with the schools before, including like resources, investments into school facilities, like what staffing changes. So we do a report on that, both in public in the meeting when we do the announcements. Before we even get into any recommendations, we want to make sure that we're saying publicly what's happened and what's going on with those schools. So we share that in that presentation, as well as in the recommendation report that gets posted on our website and gets shared publicly and pushed out. And like if you call, there's a message that says, check this report out. So we try to make sure that we're sharing it in all of those ways. And then, prior to us working with Dr. Harrell, and it's something we'll continue to do, we still do our own outreach to teachers and families to find out what they're hearing. And that's been something that we've been reporting back to the board. We thought it was important to get an outside perspective. And so we're thankful for Dr. Harrell and her team being able to conduct those interviews and be able to share those findings, because I think it helped sort of validate, what we're doing and what people are actually experiencing, while also giving us some things, to listen and learn from, to continue to evolve how we do this work. And so that's why we're always trying to listen and trying to get better about how we do it. Yeah, I think I answered.
Yeah, that was helpful. And really, it's an ongoing process. And I think just that last thing of looking at what's been done to try to quantify the amount of money, like at some point, if it's a financial decision, how are we demonstrating that we are in fact making funds available for other things?
Yeah. We can look at that. I think it's a little tricky because this process, thankfully, doesn't mean that we as a district are letting go of staff. Like staff is moving to other roles in other places. So like that staff cost is still there. But what's different is about what individual schools that are connected are able to do in terms of what they're able to provide. So that's why how we've quantified it is in like what resources, how many more positions. That's the way we've been trying to quantify it, as opposed to like from a dollar saved. I think it's also hard because, salaries go up. Like there's these other factors that go into the financial aspects. So we're mainly maintaining staff, right, as a district. And if we're looking at individual school budgets, we've just gone through some recent increases and might not give you the full story. So that's why we focused on, because for us, what's most important too is the people impact. Like we are saying, we want students to have a school experience that's as rich as students in more resource schools, right? So really being able to have, when we're talking about elementary students, the full complement of elective courses. Because often people are like, what do you mean? Well, I mean like being able to have art and gym and maybe drama and something else within a week, not I have this thing here and there. So I can check a box and say we did it for Comar, but like the student is actually experiencing in that. And for teachers, when you're in an undersized school, in terms of the staff, often you're not able to collaborate with other teachers. So it was really affirming to hear that come out in the reviews, because it's helpful to be able to plan with another person, to be able to say, hey, I'm having a hard time getting my students to understand this. How are you doing that with someone that's teaching the same thing? And then for school leaders in undersized schools, they're often wearing like 10 hats. They're performing other roles. So seeing here in school leaders say, I'm able to add an AP, I'm able to add coaches, I'm able to, like, those positions are impactful on how the work of school gets done, and that filters into how students experience and how families experience school.
Can I add one thing to that, Emily, which is like on quantifiable metrics? Really, we should be leading with our students in a school with student achievement data that is outperforming where they previously were, which relates to all those things, Angela, relates to teachers being able to plan together, relates to resourcing. And I guess I just want to say this out loud because I'm sure there are people watching who are wondering about that. And I know in the compliance report, to go back to the other one that you all submitted in August, you make note that we can't really compare apples to apples because the school closures in question, we're still taking the PARCC assessment. And it's hard to compare. You can't really compare that to the assessment, the state assessment that they're taking now. But do you have any indication? So just stating that for the record, but that aside, and moving forward, we will be able to have data. But are there any other sort of academic indicators we could point to that says that for students who were attending a school that has been closed, that their academic outcomes are indeed better in their new situation?
Yeah, with the research portion, we weren't able to say for individual kids, like because of the numbers and the change in the assessments. But what we absolutely look at in determining like what's the receiving score, how we're combining, is the achievement data. So we're trying to select as a receiving school a school that has a better performance, or we're looking at similar performance schools, at least as good as, and that this will help them get better in terms of overall in terms of a performance. And so that's the other thing why we work with our HC, and we work with the school leaders to, where we have like strong staff, really try to make sure we're bringing that staff into the receiving school. If the closing school has like strong staff, or they're similarly performing, we want to make sure that we're doing that. But you go back and you look at the schools that we recommended, right? You're seeing, because one of the key things is that we look at is making sure that we have a strong leader in place and I think that is doing work that's leading to improvement. And I think the findings in the research also reaffirms that, because people talk about that, the role of the school leader, and have positive feelings about the school leaders, the specific school leaders that are coming from that in terms of outcomes. And so we see schools having like strong outcomes for students, or on a trajectory towards improvement in the way that we want. But that's looking at the school level. What compliance report, just so I'm just clear for the thing, is trying to ask us to get down to the individual student. And because of the test, just the time period with the test changes, it makes it hard to do that at enough students to be able to. It just was too much change in that period of time, and there was periods without tests. So over time we'll be able to dig down to because one of the questions, like, for the individual students collectively, was this better? So that's the thing we want to try to be able to answer in the future.
Which theoretically, like for Edgewood, you'll be able to tell us that in a couple years.
Yes, that's right. That's right. By the time we have their compliance report, it's not going with the state doesn't change the assessment again, but we should be able to. All things staying the same, we should be able to.
Yeah, I had some questions. So, like, as a community member, parent, like if I'm in my school, are there warning signs or indicators that say you're in the yellow zone of like possible, like on a trajectory of possible closure? Because I know we talked a lot about what is the right size for schools, especially when it reaches that like budget threshold. So from the community perspective, I'm just trying to figure out if there's a way that we can articulate, like, if your school's like at this level, or if your community population is changing in this way, that's a possibility of it being on the table, rather than, because from the parent perspective, sometimes like smaller classroom sizes, it's like, oh, cool, like this is a good thing. But when a closure comes in, I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around like how much is dependent on enrollment and how much is dependent on other things. And like when we're talking about achievement overall, how much does stability like play into that?
Yeah, I mean, we try to look at both qualitative and quantitative indicators and not just be looking at math. So obviously we're looking at enrollment. We are definitely looking at schools that are under 300, schools that are under 200, because it makes it challenging to be able to meet all of the COMAR requirements. But we're also looking at who are the school leaders, what's happening with performance. We're looking at what is the school, what's the partnerships with the school, what's happening within the school. We're looking at climate indicators. We're looking at like, what does the walk, if we made a change, what is it like for students to, where would they go to? What would that walk look like, right? Like, what investments have we been able to make in the building? What other things that might be coming online that might help with enrollment? Are there other opportunities to help with enrollment? So we're trying to look at a number of factors. We've been hesitant, like in some districts, they use like sort of like a report card system and like you're in the warning thing. But I think the challenges with that is it's a challenging thing for schools. You don't want to people to assume, oh, this means my school is going to close. And then you get an erosion of parents worsening a school that might be okay if you gave it time, right? Like if you gave it time. So it's a little bit of, tricky, and it's not purely about numbers for us. Like again, the school leader, like who's in the school leaders that are in place that are like sort of connected to a group of schools, as well as who we might be keying up, just depending on like where people are in their trajectory and matter. If we make the change, do we believe we have the ability to make it better? Like, or do we have dollars set aside and resources set aside that we can use to improve like facilities, improve offerings? Like, that's a big thing that we ask ourselves, because it is emotional. We spend a lot of time talking about the emotional part of it. And what the research says is, like, if you're not ensuring that students are going to a stronger school, then it can have a negative impact on students' trajectory from there. So we have to really be sensitive to, like, do we actually have all the right preconditions to ensure that the combined school is actually going to be better? Because if it's not, there's data that suggests that's harmful to students. So that's a thing that we try to make sure that we're paying attention to as part of the part of how we think about it. So there's a lot of different factors.
And this might be a broad question, but I know the city is pushing a lot for, folks to like increase our population. Have we anticipated what impact that would have, like as like developments happening and redevelopment, like where that would have an impact that could down the line, like say 5 years from now, result in like overcrowding, or are we like, do we have enough of a buffer that we wouldn't have to worry about that for a long time?
Yeah, we're always looking at that. Like, we work with Maureen Gershberg and her team and our planning team to kind of understand what's happening with developments, and they're pretty good. Their predictions have been pretty spot on for a good period of time in terms of like how many students are coming from like planned developments and things like that. So that's been helpful. With her team too, we've one of the things we were trying to understand is just what's happening in the Southeast in terms of like areas where we're definitely already overcrowded, and it's seeming to grow and shift in terms of understanding our need. And so her team has, and we've been part of those conversations, working with an outside group to help us do a little research to try to see if we can predict even further in the future. It's tricky with numbers, but they've been pretty spot on in terms of, when developments are starting to come online and how many kids it would generate. Their predictions have been close to reality for the changes for changes going back in time. So so that's been really incredibly helpful. But we're always trying to make sure that we're not missing some sort of wave or some sort of unexpected thing. And I think we may be in a different situation, but it's hard to know how it's going to shake out because our growth has been in our Latino student pop, and I think the other context of things that's happening now may change what that looks like for us in the future. I'm not sure, but I think that's something we have to continue to pay attention to.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from anyone? Sorry, I know we're over time. Well, thank you both.
Thank you. And
Thank
you, Dr. Harrell, we're still on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye. And the last compliance report we have is, let me reopen it. IKEB graduation standards. Did anyone have any comments, questions? I did notice the improvement with multilingual learners. So that was nice.
No questions from me.
And then,
Is there
sorry, go
something you
ahead.
wanted to amplify? I noticed you would come on camera. I wasn't sure if there was something, Dr.
No,
Dabrowski.
no. I'm just here to answer. If there were any questions, I wanted to be ready.
Oh yes, I have one question. Let me keep closing my window. So the drop in graduation rate for students with disabilities, and then it showed that students that exited special education had an increase in graduation rate. Could you explain how that make, or what the difference is between those two?
Yep. Can you say again? I didn't hear you at first. You said which two categories?
It's on
page 2?
Page 3, the top of page 3. It's
Okay.
students with disabilities had a decrease in graduation rate, while students that exited special education had an increase in graduation rate.
Yep, I want to make sure I don't speak out of turn on this. The way I'm reading this is that we do see a decrease with our students with disabilities. So just over, with any student with an IEP, there's a decrease there. Students that exit, meaning that they're no longer having an IEP, we're seeing when kids exit, they've had their services, that there's an increase in that graduation rate. But I will double, triple check that with my colleague in special ed who does all of our data monitoring, Commissioner Esposito, and
Okay.
write back to you on it so I don't have it wrong. But that's how I interpret it, because we do know that when we exit students, we see it there that they are graduating well. But I want to make sure I've got that right.
Okay, and that in them exiting special education, did that have an impact on the graduation rate for students that were still identified as having disabilities? Because I'm wondering if that's what the drop is.
Right.
Technically,
No,
they're not counted in that number.
that's right. Let me find out. I can, like I said, my colleagues from OAA can help me interpret that correctly.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Are there any other
Sure.
questions? Anyone? Hearing none. And I know we don't have any, thank you. Thank you for answering. I know we don't have any public comment. Thank you all for sticking around and all the thoughtful questions. This is our last policy committee meeting. We don't have a policy committee meeting in July, but it has been an awesome year. And I want to thank everybody on the policy committee. You guys always do your homework, ask a lot of really good questions. And yeah, it's been awesome leading this committee. So yeah, and if anyone, sorry, what was that?
Just thank you, Commissioner Esposito, for keeping us on track and organized.
Of course. Thank you. So
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. So I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Last time for
Second.
Awesome. Thank you. And we will see you all next year.
Have a safe and restful summer, everyone.
Yep. Bye.
Thank
Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.